Every single job interview that you get for a business analyst role, you have to view as a form of friendly competition. And you might not necessarily know who it is that you're competing against, but you can certainly bet that the employer who is doing the hiring is going through a whole list of other candidates, and they're trying to determine who out of those candidates are going to be the best fit for the role that they have that they're trying to fill. Now, because of the fact that you don't know who the other candidates are, it's going to be very difficult for you to figure out how in relation to those other candidates you can stand out. But there are some general things that most interviewees don't actually do in interviews. And I want to offer you at least 3 of those different things that you could be doing to try to improve your chances of standing out from the rest of the competition in the business analyst job interviews that you are going to be part of. The very first of those has to do with showing as well as telling. Now, every time I walk into an interview, I walk in with at least 2 different folders. First folder is a set of notes that I have and set of notes that I've taken throughout all of the other interviews that I've done in the past. Second folder is a set of samples of things that I've produced in the past. And so the first folder serves as my guidelines for how to have a conversation. Sometimes I need to refer to notes. Sometimes I actually need to take notes. But the second folder is the important one here. And that is the one that allows you to show as well as telling. Anytime an interviewer asks you a detailed question about how you would go about producing something, it is 100%, 1,000% better for you to actually pull out an example and start walking through that example instead of just trying to describe it in text. Because when you actually show something to somebody, the way that it crystallizes in their mind and the way that it becomes a concrete element in their mind and their understanding of your candidacy is far beyond what you're going to be able to do if you are just talking about it. So if you can, what you should be doing is that you should be making your own sample portfolio containing a set of things that you've produced in the past and a set of things that you think that your interviewer might ask about. And if you've looked at the job posting very carefully, chances are that they've already told you the type of things that they want you to produce. And that's going to give you a very big hint as to what should actually be in your sample portfolio. All right, so tip number 1, make sure that you have a sample portfolio. Anytime a relevant question pops up and that you can support using something that you can show, always rely on that over just trying to describe what it is that you are talking about. The second tip that I have is a tip that a lot of people tend not to do, especially if they are not that used to interviewing. The general pattern for a lot of interviews tends to be the interviewer asks a question and the interviewee responds, right? So you as the person being interviewed, you don't want to be in a situation where you're just constantly waiting for questions to come to you. What you want to be doing is you want to be conversing with your interviewer. And so one of the most effective ways that you can do that is to make sure that anytime a question does get asked and you provide a response, at the tail end of that response is your short window of opportunity to start a conversation instead of remaining silent. So let's say, for example, your interviewer asks you a question around having to deal with certain types of stakeholders. Let's say your interviewer asks you the question such as, tell me about a time or how would you deal with a stakeholder who's being difficult? Now, you're going to have different types of responses for how you're going to deal with that. But at the end of whatever clear response you give to your interviewer, you could tag in or you could add in a very simple statement that is going to potentially spark a conversation rather than just staying silent, all right? And so let's say, for example, you respond to the answer. You could, for example, say something along the lines of, why is that? Let's say I answer the question of how I would deal with a difficult stakeholder. And then I would ask the interviewer, I would ask, just being curious, why would you ask that? Is that something that I'm likely to face if I'm in this role performing the work that you're asking or that you're interviewing for, right? Now, when you ask that quick little follow-up question, what that does is it creates a window of opportunity for the interviewer to start talking a little bit more about their environment, gives them an opportunity to jump out of this ask answer, ask, answer pattern and to actually start up a conversation. And what you're actually doing is, for a lot of interviewers, you're actually doing them a favor, because most interviewers are not professional interviewers. And so they tend to also fall into the trap of, just asking a response. But you're actually a lot of times doing them a favor by giving them that window of opportunity to start talking about some of the real issues that they want to address by filling this role. And so when you say, hey, look, this is how I would normally deal with a certain situation, but is that an issue that I'm likely to experience in this role? Can we talk a little bit more about that? If you were just to throw something like that in, you're not taking control of the conversation. You're just offering up a window of opportunity for them to elaborate a little bit more about what's going on inside of their organizations. And so that is a key thing that you should be striving to do at the end of every answer that you give, to provide the window of opportunity for the interviewer to actually change the format of the interview from an interview into a conversation. And once you start having a conversation, things become much more fluid. The impression that you leave on your interviewer in that type of a conversation is far beyond what any of the other competition might be doing if they are just answering questions and leaving things as they are. All right. So I know it took me a little while to explain that one, but this is really, really important. And you should be striving to provide opportunities to your interviewer to make sure that they can start having a conversation about the issues that they are trying to deal with by filling this role that they have. All right. The third tip that I want to offer to you is a tip that you would think should be obvious, but oftentimes when people are new and they're under a lot of pressure and they're nervous, oftentimes the honesty in some of the answers that they give can be compromised. And so the thing that you should always be striving to do in an interviewer is to make sure that you give completely honest answers to the questions that get asked. And a lot of times that is going to mean that you're going to have to admit to any of the limitations that you face. And the reason why you should do this is because the reason why this helps you stand out from a lot of other possible candidates a lot of times is the fact that it demonstrates character. All right. A lot of times when employers are hiring for a certain role, especially for permanent roles, not contract, but permanent roles, a lot of times the skills are part of what they're looking for, but the character of the person is going to also weigh in very heavily. Is this the type of person that we're going to be able to trust? And if they are starting to detect that some of your answers are either trying to dodge the question that they're asking, or they're starting to see that some of the things that you're saying might not necessarily really be true 100%, and a lot of good interviewers actually have a really good keen sense. I think a lot of people in general just have a really good keen sense of whether somebody's telling them the truth or not. But you have to make sure that you understand your own limitations and that you answer questions very honestly. I've been a practicing BA for over 15 years. And even at this stage of my career, I oftentimes find myself in interviews explaining to the interviewer about what it is that I found difficult in the last project. And so oftentimes I find myself saying things like, yeah, I really thought after 15 years I had seen everything, but the last project that I worked on through a challenge that I was not prepared for, and it was an extremely difficult thing for me to try to get over. Here are some of the things that I did, and we actually got some very good results, but things were a lot less than ideal because I wasn't really that well prepared for it. Here are some of the lessons that I've learned from that experience, right? If you answer a question in that way, you're demonstrating a little bit of humility, but more importantly, you're demonstrating the fact that you are not a know-it-all. You are the type of person who is going to face challenges, because our career, like I said, I've been in it for 15 years. Even I, at my level, I'm constantly learning new things at every different project that I do. And most interviewers know that, but if you are trying to really pull the wool over their eyes by trying to shine and make yourself look better than you are, that is more likely to leave a negative impression on your interviewer than if you were to just come clean with them and say, look, I've never been on the type of project that you're working on, but let me give me an opportunity to explain to you how I would tackle this project, given the fact that it's different from the history of work that I have, right? The fact that they've actually chosen you to be at the table and they've chosen to spend time with you already means that they see you as a potential candidate. And you don't want to foil that by, not being as honest as you possibly can, not demonstrating a little bit of humility. And in the type of answers that you give for this type of a question, the type of honest answers that you give in this type of a question that you might get asked, a lot of times is going to demonstrate, like I said, character, but also work ethic. It's your opportunity to say, I don't know how to do that type of a project. Here is how I think I would tackle it. The fact that you're in the interview itself already means that you're a candidate, so they're not going to shut you out because of that. They've already seen your experience and they're still asking you to spend time with them in an interview. You take that as an asset and you say, I don't know exactly, I've never had that experience, but here's how I would execute that project. Do you see any issues or do you see any challenges with the approach that I've just suggested, right? Again, it's the pattern is I'm being honest with you to tell you that I don't have that experience. And tip number 2 was, can you elaborate on this for me? What is it that I'm likely going to be experiencing that might actually prevent this approach that I've just suggested to you from doing what it is that we need to do, all right? So those are my 3 major tips. And again, there are so many different candidates that, that an interviewer can go through for even a single position that anything that you can do to try to get yourself to stand out from that is going to play a huge, it's going to play very largely in your favor, because if an interviewer has interviewed, let's say 10 people or 5 people even throughout the course of a week, a lot of times those interviews kind of one blends into the other and they really can't tell one from the other. Nobody really jumps out, and then they have to use a different way of making that decision. But if at the end of that process, they see exactly one person clearly stands out from that crowd, then there is no competition there. All right. So I hope that these tips have been helpful. By no means are these the only types of things that you should be doing, but this is a list of things that I always make sure that I'm doing in the interviews that I go through. And these are a lot of times the interviews that I've done of other analysts for my own teams. I try to see if they're demonstrating these types of characteristics themselves. All right, so hope this has been helpful, and I will see you on the next video.